appreciate it that you were willing to come and do it. I'm grateful to have you. Hi, good morning. I'm Reverend Mary Marie Shelton, the community spiritual leader here at Golden Gate Center for Spiritual Living. If you're with us for the first time today, I want you to know that your presence here with us is a gift, and we are happy to receive it and grateful that you're here. We want you to know that whoever you are, wherever you may be on your pathway of faith, you are welcome here. And we hope you'll be with us often in the future. I'll say more about the welcome to you specifically later on in the service. It's August. Did you notice? How can it be August? Wasn't it just May? You can't see the words clearly on this image of the two hands that are the earth here. But what it says is respect other nations and peoples. And then over on the side it says gratitude. Respect other nations and peoples. It's so much easier to say than it is to live. Because there's so much that's unfamiliar to us with other nations or peoples or ethnicities or practices or languages or cultures or foods or faiths. There's so much to all of that. And there are many things that we don't understand or that aren't familiar to us. And because they're not familiar to us, it's hard for us to make space for them. And traditionally, when we don't understand somebody else, we may not know that we're not understanding them. We may be making assumptions without realizing that their experience is not ours. I remember giving an example in a talk once at Asilomar, which was our annual summer conference for all centers for spiritual living for many years. And I was giving a talk at the conference one year, and I made reference to some way in which our mothers do something with us as we're growing up, and I don't even remember what it was. And one of my African American colleagues came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, not all of our mothers treated us that way or talked to us that way or did that. And very gently let me know that the example I had given was not inclusive, even though I intended for it to be. And that was really, it was embarrassing, but it was also really good to get reminded that I needed to make space for the idea that not everybody's experience was mine. Many years ago, when I was on the international board for Centers for Spiritual Living, then it was just United Centers for Spiritual Living, that was part of the organization. We had a mixed racial international board, and we watched a film together called The Color of Fear, which was a group of men together, 2 Asian American men, 2 African American men, 2 Latino men, and 2 white men. And they were having a conversation about racism. And one of the white men was very aware of kind of the cultural assumptions that get made and get baked in to white culture. And the other one wasn't, particularly. And so he was trying to convince everybody else, really, that, you know, we're all Americans, we're all the same, we all have, you know, we should just, you know, stand up for our rights that we're guaranteed and just live our lives, and we don't need to have a particular reference to race, and to be able to stand one's ground. And one of the African American men who had been trying to communicate with this guy for a while already began to respond to him. And as he responded, in a very measured way, the group kind of laughed nervously, and something about that clicked something off in him, and he became very angry, like increasingly angry as he was speaking. And he was talking about how the culture of whiteness has spread through the world and encroached on areas that were traditionally another color, before that. So Europe was white, but Australia was black. Africa was black. The Americas were red. And so he said, you are not standing on your ground, you are standing on red ground. And that hit me with such force in a way that I had never thought of. So today I'm talking about, can I stand my ground without knowing who I am? One of the things this fellow pointed out is, and he said, get ethnic. He said, we are dying here, losing our own sense of who we are by trying to have to adapt to a culture that thinks everybody should be the same. He said, you're dying too, you just don't know it. Get ethnic. Like, don't come to our cultures and appropriate stuff and take it back and use it. Find out what yours is. And that was so powerful for me because up until that time, I hadn't given particular thought to how much my Irish roots might be affecting who I am, and I had no real concept of Irish culture at all that I was aware of. And so, you can't see the words on this, but this is what North America looked like. These are not our states. These are tribal areas. That's what the United States and Canada looked like before Europeans came. And so unless we're connected genetically to those folks, this is not our ground, right? We came in and made it our ground, but in a sense our roots lie elsewhere. And I know it may sound like I'm making us wrong, but what I'm trying to do is actually not do that, but acknowledge the difficulty in the interconnectedness that we all live, and the importance of having respect for all the roots where they came from. I think we talk about America as being a melting pot, and actually my experience of living in Canada was that there was more space for ethnicity to express as it is and be included in the Canadian experience, so that it was more like, and I'm not saying they do this so much better than we do, they have a lot of challenges too, but it is more like the concept of a salad bowl with a lot of variety of ingredients in it than a melting pot where everybody becomes the same. So it's an interesting imagery. The assumption that we know something. When I was going to Russia 20 years ago, I was told not before I went, after I was there actually, that pointing at anything or anyone is considered very rude. That if you're going to gesture towards something, you use the whole hand, not one finger. That was interesting to know. And because when I went to India, we flew through Thailand, I was taught that you do not pat anyone on the head in Thailand, not children, not anybody. And you never sit with your legs crossed in such a way that your foot is pointing at another person, because that's considered very rude. Well, unless we know those things, we would not assume that there was anything offensive about any of them, or at least I didn't. I had to be educated. I had to learn something. So here's a little story about somebody making an assumption. A shepherd was tending his flock in a field when a new sports car screeched to a stop on the road nearby in a cloud of dust. The driver, a young man in expensive designer clothes and sunglasses, leaned out of the window and shouted over to the shepherd, "If I tell you exactly how many sheep you have here, can I take one?" The shepherd looked up slowly at the young man, then looked at his peaceful flock and calmly answered, "Sure, why not?" So the young man stepped out of his car, holding the latest iPad, which he proceeded to use to contact a series of websites, calling up first satellite navigation to pinpoint his exact location, and then keying in the location to generate an ultra-high resolution image of the field. And after emailing that image to a specialized image processing facility, the processed data was returned. He fed that data into an online database and entered the parameters of the reports he required. And within another few seconds, a miniature wireless printer in the car produced a full-color report containing several pages of analysis and results. And the young man studied the data for a few more seconds and then returned to the shepherd. You have exactly 1,586 sheep, including 3 rams and 722 lambs. That's right, said the shepherd, mildly impressed. Well, I guess that means you get to take one of my sheep. And the young man made his choice and loaded the animal into the back seat of his car, at which point the shepherd said, almost as an afterthought, hey there, young man, if I can tell you what your business is, will you give me my sheep back? And the young man, feeling confident, agreed. You're a consultant, said the shepherd. Wow, that's right, said the young man, taken aback. How did you guess that? No guessing required, answered the shepherd. You showed up here, even though nobody called you. You took a fee for giving me an answer that I already know to a question I never asked. And you know nothing about my business. Now give me back my dog. Now, inasmuch as it can be funny when we don't know something and somebody realizes that we don't know something, but we don't know, there's also a dark side to that. So as we've seen in the United States, there is almost no group of people that hasn't been shunned. And this is just some of them. Now, these are going to go by pretty quickly, so you won't necessarily be able to read them, but you might catch them as they go by and get a sense of how many different groups that may now be considered mainstream, I know that's not there yet, were included in this. So just have a look. Muslims are just the latest iteration. And what we see from this is that when we are afraid of somebody, when we are afraid that their differences are going to cause us to lose something, we vilify them. But it's the same story over and over again. And as we get used to that particular group of people, all that rhetoric tones down, and in some cases is forgotten, and in other cases scars are carried generationally for decades. So the question then becomes, really, who do I think I am? Who do we think we, whatever we means at the moment, who do we think we are? And what am I unaware that I don't know about others? Other people may be aware that I don't know it by things that I say or things that I do, but I may not know it. Or I may know it and discount it as not particularly important. There has been, at one time there was anyway, kind of an attempt in white culture to be inclusive by saying we're all the same, or I don't see color. But those things are actually off-putting to somebody who's a person of color or is not a white person, because we're essentially identifying human beings as how we are if we're white, and thinking, let's all be like that. Not everybody wants to be like that. They want to be recognized for what they are. Now, I know this is kind of heavy. Are you hanging in here with me right now? Because what we teach in religious science is that we are one, right? That we are one, that one is in all and all are in one. So that means that we all contain each other, that I contain you, even the parts of you I don't know about or don't recognize or disagree with. You contain me, even the parts of me that irritate the heck out of you. And all is all inclusive. It contains all, no exceptions. Not trying to make it into sameness, but oneness expressing as multiplicity. And it's huge to try and get a hold of that concept, particularly when we're uncomfortable with somebody else for some reason. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is said to have said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." And I've often said, when I'm talking about our teaching, when I'm talking about creative law, that creative law doesn't just work for people who deserve it. Creative law works for those who know how to use it, regardless of how they're using it or whether or not they deserve to have creative law manifest what they are putting out. The chair right now of the Leadership Council for Centers for Spiritual Living, Tracy Brown, is an African-American woman who wrote this book called Stained Glass Spirit, which is about centers, spiritual centers, becoming not a melting pot, but a stained glass, where every aspect of the glass is needed and wanted to create the whole. And she says this: change is always happening. When we, who are spiritually grounded and guided, fail to engage with the topics and themes that are challenging our communities and our nations, we leave the arc of change to be completely influenced by those who believe in duality, pain, negative use of power, and control through fear or violence. When we fail to engage, we are actually withholding the love, peace, joy, balance, harmony, and wholeness of spirit. No amount of silent prayer, individually holding a vision, or denying what is happening in the world will create change if those spiritual practices are not matched by physical action. So often we say we believe Ernest Holmes' words, there is a power for good in the universe and it is available to all. But often our actions are communicating, I'll just keep all that good stuff for myself and I don't care if others have it. Let them find their own way. I think this is a downside in assumptions that get made because our teaching was languaged originally toward individuals, not toward us as a collective in general. And yet Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind also says, we are therefore members of the universe. And being members of that which unites everything, we are some part of each other. We see that the first principle of life is oneness. The first performance of life is multiplying itself without dividing itself. Life must be one, and that one, in order to be expressed, must be many. But the many, in order to exist, must live in the one. We are one even while we are many, and since each of us is a part of the whole, if we seek to destroy each other, we only ultimately hurt ourselves. This is the great lesson of life, Holmes says. And so it sounds to me like we are being called then to really ask ourselves another question now, which is, so who am I really? Who am I in what I know in truth, in the highest levels of my consciousness? And who am I in how I interact with the world? Who am I in the assumptions that I make? Who do I think they are? Who is they? Really, from the ultimate, they doesn't exist at all. I had a member in my congregation in Huntington Beach a long time ago who was a very mystical woman. And she took objection to us saying, I and the Father, or God and I are one. She said, shouldn't it be God and I is one? I thought, whoa, that's deep. I mean, grammatically it feels weird to me, but God and I is one. One is God and I. Or actually, there's only God, just showing up as I in all these different places. And who are they? Well, the truth is, we're all made of what Ernest Holmes referred to as soul stuff. Or as Joni Mitchell said, we're stardust. Million-year-old carbon. We are all made from the same stuff. It's just different manifestations of the same stuff. So who are we really? Who are they? We are the universe. And the universe shows up for us depending upon the vision we're allowing. We are the universe. We're looking at the universe is looking at us, and it is the divine looking at the divine, looking at the divine. And we don't all have to know that for that to be true. Clearly, we don't all know that. This week, I had the opportunity to meet this man. He is visiting from his home in India, and he is a Tibetan monk. His name is Abe Rinpoche. Geshe Lama Abe Tulku Rinpoche. Geshe means that he has the equivalent of a PhD in Buddhist studies. Rinpoche means that he was recognized by the Dalai Lama as a reincarnation of a previous Lama. He is 46 years old. He is Tibetan, but I don't know that he's ever been to Tibet. His parents fled Tibet with the Dalai Lama when the Chinese occupied Tibet in 1959. So he was clearly not born yet at that time. And yet, his responsibility as the reincarnation of this particular Rinpoche is a particular monastery that is in Tibet. Now, at the same time, he has begun teaching new young monks in India, in southern India, and he is beginning to create for them there a monastery. And I want to tell you something about this. So, he says, I must now start my responsibility as an abbot. Now, he speaks and understands English pretty well, but this is a little bumpy in the reading, because I think he wrote it. So he says, I intend to build a monastery, or a labrang, in India. The concept of labran is more inclusive than monastery because it becomes a dynamic center where people come for retreats and meditations, as well as where the young monks get trained. Right now, he has 6 or 7 young monks who are studying with him. They range in age from about 7 on up. He began himself at age 7. It was when he was 12 years old, he was recognized as a reincarnation of this previous Lama. And this monastery he wants to build in southern India. He bought 3 acres of land. They've now got the water. They found the underground water. They're dealing with the water. They've installed electricity. And when he goes back to India, they will begin to break ground. He'll meet with the architects and they'll begin to break ground. And he says this, I especially want to help Tibetan, Indian, Nepalese, Vietnamese, and Bhutanese boys from remote villages who would not otherwise be able to receive such a complete education, including the opportunity to become a geshe, a PhD in Buddhist philosophy, which requires 23 years of specific study. So when these boys come, he takes full responsibility for their education, for their food, for their clothing, for their playtime, for their cleaning, for everything associated with them, just as the monastery did for him. And so he hopes to eventually have up to 25 monks. He is here, as he said to me on Thursday, for 4 reasons. He said, first, 7 billion human beings on the planet. I am one part of 7 billion. I am a human being. Second, I am Tibetan Buddhist monk. So I teach Buddhist ways of peaceful mind. Third, I am Tibetan. So for those who are interested, I share about situation in Tibet. And fourth, I come to get support for my project. And so I said to him, well, tell me about the project. You know, what are you looking for? And he said, well, for $5 a month or $60 a year, a monk that will pay for one of the boys. Now, as Amanda and I were discussing this later, what we recognized was that probably it's not $60 covers everything for one boy for a year, but it assists in everything that's provided for that boy, and also helps the monastery come into being. So for $60 a year, that's what he's asking for. I said, give me a bunch of those flyers. I think $60 a year is pretty much nothing. I bet I've got some people who'd be willing to do that. There's a stack of these over on the community table. Each one is a packet that has a photograph of one of the boys and his bio. And then under that is Rinpoche's bio and information that I was just reading to you from. And then 2 pages that are the floor plans for what they hope this monastery will look like. And the last page is all of his banking information, so you could send a direct contribution to Bank of America, to that fund, and when he comes back to the United States next year, he would come and get it. I encourage you to take a look at this, and if you decide to take one of these to make a donation, then also fill out a separate form that's there that asks for your email and all of that, because they will keep you up to date on how the boys are doing. This is a part of taking an action that is concrete for a world that works for everyone, that is respect for other nations and other peoples, because we are all growing in this. And the very last part of his information says, I thank you and I invite you to come and visit us if you would like to come on retreat or learn a little bit about Buddhism. We would welcome you. And that means you would stay there and they would feed you. He's encouraging people to come and visit this monastery in India. It's not there yet, but it will be there. And this man exudes peace. When he smiles, he has dimples. He's got just the slightest twinkle. It's not quite mischievous, but it might lean in that direction maybe. He is third in line to the Dalai Lama in the hierarchy, I guess. So all of us are expanding, learning, growing, getting better. And this is a story about us that I want to share with you. This is by Andy Weir. You were on your way home when you died. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. You left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save you, but to no avail. Your body was so utterly shattered, you were better off, trust me. And that's when you met me. What happened, you asked? Where am I? You died, I said matter-of-factly. No point in mincing words. There was a truck, and it was a skidding. Yep, I said. I died? Yep. But don't feel bad about it. Everyone dies, I said. You looked around. There was nothingness, just you and me. What is this place, you asked? Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God, you asked? Yep, I replied, I'm God. My kids, my wife, you said. What about them? Will they be all right? That's what I like to see, I said. You just died, and your main concern is for your family. That's good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man, or possibly a woman. Some vague authority figure, maybe. More of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said, they'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to develop contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for feeling relieved. Oh, you said, so what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Ah, you said, so the Hindus were right. All religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. You followed along as we strode through the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular, I said. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then, you asked? When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby. So all my experiences and everything I did in this life won't matter. Not so, I said. You have within you all the knowledge and experiences of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like sticking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experiences it had. You've been in human form for the last 48 years, so you haven't stretched out yet and felt the rest of your immense consciousness. But if we hung out here for long enough, you'd start remembering everything. But there's no point in doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots and lots, I said. This time around, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. Wait, what? You stammered? You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically, time, as you know, it only exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where you come from, you said? Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else. And there are others like me. I know you'll want to know what it's like there, but honestly, you wouldn't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point. Oh, sure, it happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know it's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously, I asked. Seriously, you're asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that just a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question, you persisted. I looked you in the eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe is for you to mature. You mean mankind, you want us to mature? No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me? What about everyone else? There is no one else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on earth, all you, different incarnations of you. Wait, I'm everyone? Now you're getting it, I said, with a congratulatory slap on the back. I am every human being who ever lived, or whoever will live, yes. I'm Abraham Lincoln. And you're John Wilkes Booth, too, I added. I'm Hitler, you said, appalled. And you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus? And you're everyone who followed him. You fell silent. Every time you victimize someone else, I said, you were victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was or will be experienced by you. You thought a long time. Why, you ask me? Why do all this? Because someday you will become like me. Because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. Whoa, you said, incredulous. You mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. So the whole universe, you said, it's just an egg, I answered. Now it's time for you to move on to your next life. And I sent you on your way. It's an interesting idea to think about there being no other. The namaste greeting, the God in me beholds the God in you, is a recognition that there's something more going on than what we appear to be or what we think we are. That in essence, there isn't a blade of grass that isn't you. There isn't a microphone that isn't me. There isn't a piece of cement that isn't all of us. It's not just human beings. It's everything that is. We are that. It is us. There's only one. It's a big idea. But it's also deeply comforting in the sense that, as Ram Dass says, it's beautiful, it stinks. There's nothing to do. Do it. This is the paradox of coming into form, which is ever-changing, while being part of one, which is eternal, always, and unbounded. This is who we are. And so, in the context of the metaphor, if we are a fetus, then let us grow a more awake, peaceful heart in respecting other peoples and other nations, and being willing to stand up, to show up, to speak up, and to grow together as one human family. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you.